Hey everyone, and welcome back to week 4 of your Generational Strategist certification. Now, if you've made it this far, first of all, congratulations. I know that this is a rigorous course that it requires time and intention and commitment. So if you've gotten this far, congratulations. And this is the fun part. This is where we actually go into how to prepare a presentation. And so part of the final wrap up of your certification is you actually doing a presentation and submitting it to the rest of the peers and colleagues going through this program. And in the coming days and weeks, you'll be getting feedback from myself and others about your presentation. So certainly make it count. In today's presentation, I'm going to be going over, number one, how do you choose a presentation? I'm going to show you where to find it in the portal and how to customize it, and show you really what aspects of a presentation is going to make it matter the most to you. Secondly, I'm going to go over what to cover, how to set up your presentation, and really how to make sure you're delivering it to the best of your ability. Number 3, I'm going to share how you will be evaluated. I'm going to give you the rubric and show you how to really shine not only in this presentation, but in future presentations as well. And number 4, I'm going to show you how to actually upload it so that way your peers and colleagues can go ahead and give you the feedback that you deserve. So first, how do you choose a presentation? I'm going to give you some great fundamentals and then actually walk you through the portal of how you can download and customize the presentation. So first of all, you want to pick a topic that you're familiar with. One of the most stressful aspects of being a trainer or a speaker can be being asked to speak or being required to speak on something that you don't feel comfortable with. Maybe it's new information to you, maybe you haven't presented on it before. And so one of the key elements of presenting something for the first time is practicing anywhere between 5 and 15 times by yourself or in front of a mirror before you go out and do the presentation yourself. Now, everyone has their own unique style. I'm the kind of person that I like to go through the presentation 5 times just reading, and then I'll go ahead and do it about 5 to 10 times just verbally so I can hear myself presenting. And that way I can provide some muscle memory to my mind and to my mouth of what it is I'm going to be getting ready to present. But there are others who prefer to write out the presentation beforehand or to record it and then listen to it maybe while they're commuting or at the gym. Whatever works well for you. Because the key is, if it's a topic that you're familiar with, if it's a topic that you're passionate about, you're going to be able to spend more of your energy interacting with the crowd, making sure the audience is paying attention and digesting the information. And you're going to spend less time trying to think about what it is that you're going to say next. So, especially for this presentation, pick a topic that you're familiar with. One of the key aspects of the presentations that we give you is that they're all customizable. So even if there's an aspect of one presentation, so for example, you want to talk about generations, but you also want to talk about mentoring, that's fantastic. Go ahead and combine the different presentations to really fit whatever your needs are. Number 2, when you're doing this presentation, I want you to pick an audience to whom you're presenting. It's really helpful, so that way you know what anecdotes to use, you know what types of information to provide, and you know the type or the style of the presentation. So for example, if you are presenting to college students about career readiness, your anecdotes and your energy are probably going to be different than if you are presenting on how to retain great millennial talent to a group of executives. So you can either state at the beginning of your presentation you upload, or just in any notes that you send me, go ahead and tell me who this is for, so that way myself and the other folks who are evaluating you can keep that in mind as you are presenting. But your audience is always one of the first aspects that you want to address whenever speaking to anyone, because it's really going to help provide a platform and a mindset for yourself as you get into the actual presentation mechanics. Number 3, determine what their biggest needs are. Now remember, in our first session, we talked about developing your expert statement and being really focused on the audience who you're addressing. Consider what their primary need is and their secondary need. Now, you don't necessarily need to tell them what their needs are, because sometimes it can come across as a little rude. So maybe their primary need is that they are really having a hard time keeping their talent, but their secondary need is that people don't come into work on time and there's just kind of a low engagement threshold. You don't necessarily need to get up and say, you have a really hard time keeping great people. But it is important for you to keep in mind that in the back of their heads, they're thinking, how does this address my biggest need, which is keeping people from quitting? So determine what their biggest need is and really use that as an anchor point for you to put your whole presentation around. Number 4, you need to clearly communicate how your expertise will help them achieve really great results. So consider what your audience's big dreams are. If it's on the individual level, maybe they're thinking, I want to become an executive one day. Or maybe your audience is thinking, I retire in 3 years, so that's really what I'm focused on. Whatever the big dreams are of your audience, you need to keep that in mind. So that way you are, again, providing anecdotes and stories that reflect that, but also too, you are tying any part of your content to the challenges, needs, and desires of your audience. So I want to go ahead and show you how to download and customize your presentation inside of the portal. So here we are inside of the trainer portal. Here's our welcome message. As I'm sure that you've already spent some time in here, down here is our presentation drop-down button. So say, for example, you want to do a presentation on retention. So maybe some aspects of this are exciting to you, and so you're thinking, well, I'm going to present to, an audience of managers and supervisors that have high turnover and low engagement. So that's your audience. You've already chosen that. The topic is retention because maybe you have experience or are passionate about helping people stay at their jobs and just having a better place to work overall. So you come onto what we have here, and we've got some downloadable content. So we have the presentation itself, so you can go ahead and download the presentation here, and it'll pop up, and you can go ahead and customize it with any content you desire. Now, when you open up the PowerPoint here, you'll see that all of our branding is associated with the presentation itself. You can use our branding, or if you have your own branding or want no branding at all, go right ahead and customize it however you want. So you want to go ahead and put whatever the title is of the presentation itself. So a lot of times we'll just do attract, retain, retrain. It's really easy to remember, but maybe you want to do something kind of catchier or a better title. So maybe you'll say, the real reason your employees are quitting. And then you can go ahead and keep this down here, or you can just put your name. Bob Smith, PhD, generational strategist. Okay, there you go. So you've got, your name, what you're associated with, and then, your certification. So then you can go ahead and flow through this information when it comes to each of these presentation aspects. Now you can go ahead and, again, customize it however you want to whatever you want to be covering. But I would make sure that you spend some time going through the presentation, become extremely familiar with it before creating your own version. Now, one of the key areas or aspects of all of our trainings are that there's the actual presentation example that I provide where I've actually done the presentation for you in each of these regards. So each of these presentations have something of me recorded actually presenting the content. So you can go ahead and listen to it. Typically, folks will listen to it 2 or 3 or more times just to get the information inside of their head. And then how you actually process through the information is going to be really unique to you and your audience, of course. So go ahead and become very familiar with the content here. Now, we're not having you develop any resources. You don't necessarily need to create a worksheet or anything that goes alongside each of these presentations, so don't worry about that. All right, now we're going to go over what to cover. Now, this presentation for purposes of evaluation only needs to be about 18 to 20 minutes long. So about the same time of a TED Talk. Now, something that you're going to be brought in to present on is probably going to be an average of 60 minutes to 90 minutes. I've done presentations as long as 3 hours and as long as 5 hours. I'm certainly not asking you to do that. If you can get these concepts down in 18 to 20 minutes, I know that you have grappled with the information, you can effectively process it, and then present on the information itself. So here are some great ways you can design your presentation, your 18 to 20 minute presentation. The first is to open up with your story. Now, you don't necessarily need to tell me, where you were born and what you went to school on. Remember, the audience just needs to know quickly that you're an expert and that they should trust you. So for example, I will oftentimes open up by saying, I'm Gabrielle Boucher. I've been studying millennials for over 11 years, and I got into this business because I started going to conferences where I recognized the only people talking about millennials were not actually millennials. Then some people will laugh, and then I'll explain that I've written 4 books and have the opportunity to work with major brands around the world. So I spent about 45 seconds giving them permission to trust me because I developed my expert statement in a story-driven way. So practice your expert statement that we did in the first video and practice how you're going to integrate it into your presentation itself. Because the first 30 seconds is really where the audience is going to determine whether or not they believe you, whether or not they trust you, and whether or not the content is going to be relevant to their situation. The second step is to line out why this topic is important. You need to address whatever elephant in the room there is. So if you're talking to a group of realtors, for example, and you're discussing generational stereotypes, you're going to tie it into their work in working with a number of generations and maybe even use a personal anecdote or a story or something you read in the news about how someone in their field or a similar field stereotyped someone and then lost, a $2 million deal or something like that. So make it relevant, make it important to the audience that you're speaking to. The third thing you need to do is to address the concerns or myths that they believe, especially when it comes to generational engagement topics. What I have found is everyone has an opinion. Either this topic is really well received and they're thinking, oh gosh, finally someone is talking about it. Or they're thinking, oh gosh, I've heard this a million times and, please shoot me now, or when's the next coffee break? So realize that you could have a mixed crowd. So a lot of times I like to address the myths that they may have, maybe about their industry. So sometimes I'll insert some statistics that are relevant to their industry or their area in the world, or their interest area. So make it relevant again, but then address whatever myths that they have. So sometimes I'll say, you're probably thinking this topic about generational stereotypes, for example, is something that we need to stop talking about. You may be thinking, what's so different than when I was a kid? And then I'll provide 3 reasons why this topic is important and why it is relevant. So go ahead and address their concerns. When you speak them out, it then causes them to hear how ridiculous their objections are and causes them to trust you more. Number 4, deliver the content itself. I'm going to share with you here in a moment my strategy of 3s, where I actually design all of my presentations based off of this currently. The presentations that you guys have and you can download, there's a lot more content in there, strategically provided, so that way you can pick and choose. I didn't want to give you how I do all of my presentations because that may not work well for you. And frankly, I think more is better when it comes to having information to choose from. But I do want to share with you how I memorize content and deliver content. And finally, you want to open it up for questions. Now, the presentation itself you're giving in your 18 to 20 minute submission will not have questions as it is pre-recorded. Think of it almost like a webinar, or if you want to stand up and make it like a TED Talk and maybe you don't want to have a PowerPoint at all, you can certainly do that as well. So I will show you how to do each of the different types of styles and how you should structure your presentation based off of what style you're going after. So this is my law of threes. And I've really found it works incredibly well when it comes to helping the audience understand the content. There's nothing worse than a super long list of things that people are going to have to pay attention to and remember. Really, when it comes to your presentation, they should just remember one thing. So think about that before you get too far into your content. What's the one thing you want them to remember? And come back to it multiple times. I like to do the law of threes when I present. It's usually, here are the 3 myths that you believe, here are the 3 reasons why it's important, here are the 3 strategies or programs to adopt. It's really that simple. And oftentimes at the end, people will come to me and say, wow, the 3s really help me understand and actually pay attention to what it is that you are saying. Because at the end of the day, it's not just the content that we provide, but it's the transformation and ultimately the habits that we then develop inside of the audience itself. So the law of threes is really quite simple, and I even did it here. I like to use 3 distinct words to communicate each point. Not a sentence, but a word. So maybe I'll say, number 1, expectations, and that will be my first point. And maybe number 2 will be transformation, and then that'll be my second point. And say number 3 will be future. Okay, great. So I've got 3 words that have some sort of meaning, but you don't know why the meaning is unique to what it is that I'm presenting on. And I just made up those 3 words. So, using that I think is really helpful for you as a presenter to remember where you're going. Because again, there is nothing worse than presenting and then having no PowerPoint or having no technology and things just go down. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conference or a presentation room and the PowerPoint isn't working. And if I didn't have the law of threes where I could just say, okay, I know my top 3 points of how I'm going to get there and what they're about, everything else I can fill in on the way. Okay, so you have your 3 big points. Number 2, use a story or an illustration for each point. Now, sometimes they can be great stories that you heard or experienced, but they can also be statistics. They can be, examples or illustrations. So sometimes I'll do for instances. So a for instance is a story where I put them in charge of coming up with a solution. So one of my favorites is the dirt in the backyard, for instance. So I'll say, for instance, I have you come over to my backyard and I have a giant pile of dirt on one side of my backyard. And then I ask you to move that dirt from one side of my backyard to the other side of my backyard. What would you want to know? And they all look kind of inquisitive. And then I'll say, you would probably want to know why, right? And then they'll say, yes. And then I'll make a joke like, are you, building a pool or, burying a dead body or something? And then they all laugh again. So doing a for instance is a great way to illustrate a point. That one, I'm illustrating the point that context matters, that people want to know why they're working. They're not just going to blindly dig a hole in a backyard, for example. So think of illustrations for each point as well. Number 3, provide an example of how it actually relates to their current position or need. So that could be something that you turn back on them, and maybe it's an activity that you provide. Now, oftentimes our rule is every 20 minutes, you have them do some sort of activity. Science actually shows that every 10 minutes or so, you have to re-win over a crowd. Doing an activity every 10 minutes is difficult because, say, you're doing a 60-minute presentation, your activity takes about 3 minutes to 4 minutes, you're really limiting your actual presentation and really at that point just managing a workshop. So if you're doing a presentation, 3 activities inside of a 60-minute window is typically a great place to start. So maybe you'll give them something that they have to kind of chew on and practice themselves. One of my most often used ones is I'll give them an example where an employee is supposed to stay late for work, but they can't because they have tickets to a concert. And so I call it the concert conundrum because then you have to work with the employee to determine how the work is going to get done. And so it really causes them to question work-life balance. How do they treat and relate to and even respect the priorities of other generations or other people? And, gets them really thinking about how do we make sure that we are respecting the personal lives of the people on our team. So doing something where you actually get them to solve a problem that they may have already experienced or could experience in the future is a really great way of how it actually relates to their current position or need. Sometimes I'll even have them answer the question themselves. So sometimes I'll have them, if I have a fairly active bunch, because that certainly matters as well. Sometimes you'll have an audience that just looks at you and doesn't say anything the entire time. And sometimes you have an audience who's really chatty, and you can tell that they learn by verbally processing the information. And that's fantastic. So pay attention when you're presenting. And again, a great teacher, a great trainer, listens more than they talk. So you're going to be listening to the nonverbals of the people of the room to make sure that they are processing the information. So for example, if I'm in any of my 3 points and I see people are texting or nodding off or just not really paying attention, I then know that it's time for an activity. Even if I don't even have an activity into the next section, I'll put it in that section because I'm not doing them any favors by explaining my points if they're not processing what it is that I'm saying. So those are just some great tips that I want you to know when it comes to presenting. So now let's go over how you will be evaluated for this presentation itself. In your packet, you got the rubric, which you will use to consider how you develop your presentation itself. You will also get an email with the rubric for you to be able to fill out for the other people who you are evaluating as well. So you'll put their name in the upper left-hand corner, and then you will give them a score based off of how well you think that they did. Now, here are the basics of what you're going to be going over. You will be evaluated on your technique and how you understand the concepts. You'll be evaluated on your presentation skills. You'll be evaluated on your reflection and understanding. Is it clear that you have considered the topic, that you understand it, and that you have an awareness of how it is communicated? Your overall craftsmanship, so how you design your presentation. Does it make sense? Is there an easy flow? And then of course your effort. If you're just coming in and not truly trying to give a best effort of this presentation, it will be extremely clear. Whether it is that it comes in late, or that the quality is bad, or that it's clear that you just kind of threw it together and didn't really care, that's certainly going to be very apparent as well. So here is a basic rubric for you to consider and evaluate yourself on how you're doing each of these as well. I've actually found I'm way more harsh on myself than other people are when they evaluate me. But again, use this as a rubric when you evaluate the others who go through the program, because your insight is going to be extremely helpful for them to improve their own presentation as well. Okay, how do you upload your presentation? I'm going to go through how you upload your presentation and how to make sure that it is ready for distribution to other folks on the team. Okay, when you are given a link, which will be sent to you shortly, you'll have access to the Generational Strategist 2019 presentations folder. Once you are done finishing your presentation, you're going to go ahead and drop the files here, or you can go ahead and upload it by clicking one of the buttons that shows how to upload. You can just drag and drop the presentation and make sure that it's actually processed. Now, how you record the presentation is completely up to you. Now, you can do the presentation by using Skype. So for example, if you want to record a video on Skype, go ahead and log in to Skype, and then you can go ahead and share your screen on Skype. And that's going to make sure that your entire screen is then recorded, and then you put your presentation into presentation mode and record the entire screen in that regard. But make sure that you have the ability on Skype to record. You can record it on Zoom. So Zoom calls, for example, are really great because you can not only record all of your videos, but you can record the screen share as well. And if you want to have your face in there, that's perfectly fine as well. Just remember, if you're on camera, what it is that you're doing. So go ahead and use Zoom if you'd like. There are plenty of others as well where you can record just your face and not use any sort of screen sharing as well. So something like a QuickTime or another video recording software on your computer is a great way to go as well. And that way you can record yourself, but some of those platforms don't let you record a screen share, so you wouldn't be able to see any of the slides that you're recording as well. So just keep that in mind. Again, for this presentation purposes, you do not need to have a presentation, but if it helps you, go ahead and find a platform that works for screen shares as well. We will send you a full list of all of the platforms that are helpful for doing a screen share, so you can go ahead and record your video, again, 18 to 20 minutes, and then go ahead and upload it to this presentation file, Generational Strategist 2019 Presentations. We will give you the link, and that way you can make sure that all of your information will be here and you will have the opportunity to be evaluated on your work.